Introduction. Christ says, I have come to rectify the misinterpretations placed on the teachings given when known as Jesus in Palestine more than 2,000 years ago. Christ also says, because people are on the threshold of a world crisis of enormous proportions, it is vital for survival that I, the Christ, should reach all who will listen. You know little of the true processes of creation in which you, yourselves, play a major role. It is imperative you should understand them sufficiently to enable you to embark on the implementation of a higher vision for all humanity. It is impossible for my spiritual consciousness to take on human form. To enable me to speak to you directly, I have deprogrammed and prepared a receptive, obedient mind to receive my truth and frame it in words. She is my recorder. The recorder says, before reading Christ's letters, you may want to know how this spiritual exercise of transmission of consciousness was achieved. The work of preparing me to become Christ's recorder began 40 years ago when, as a committed Christian, encountering grievous difficulties as a farmer and asking Christ for help, an unexpected, forceful answer caused me to re-examine and discard all religious dogma. Enlightenment followed and clearly led in new directions of work and study. I founded a business dealing with people, which flourished. For 7 years, I enjoyed success and much happiness. To grow in spiritual understanding, I then went through diverse, very traumatic human experiences and, after much suffering, painfully and gainfully learnt their lessons, then transcended them spiritually. One evening, in response to prayer for guidance, the presence of Christ became a reality, who gave me irrefutable proof of his identity. He spoke to me for an hour, sending strong waves of cosmic love through my body, and gave me a brief description of what I was to be taught and eventually achieve. A fortnight later, he led me through a transcendent experience of conscious union with God. I became a healer and instrumental in some instantaneous healings. From 1966 to 1978, at important parts of my life, in response to questioning, Christ instructed me in spiritual scientific principles, now explained by Christ in his letters. In 1975, I experienced a night of visions describing events between 1983 and 1994, all of which came true. I was again told there would be work for me to do in the future. Eventually, after many and varied vicissitudes, always alleviated by my strong connection with Christ and my deepening understanding and personal experience of first cause, I was brought to my present home. Here, I have lived an increasingly solitary life in the past 20 years, sometimes in clear and close contact with Christ, and sometimes left to strengthen my faith and patience in the spiritually dry periods. In the past 4 years, I have been led through mental, emotional purification, reaching my goal of perfect inner peace and joy. Christ has put me through a gradual but very clear refining process. When perfectly empty of self, malleable and receptive, the voice began its dictation, and the letters began to take shape. These letters are entirely the work of Christ. Nothing in them has been derived from other literature, although in recent years, certain writers have obviously drawn much of their own inspired insight from Christ's conscious radiation of truth. All those who are in harmony with his consciousness are greatly blessed. I am merely the recorder, nothing more. Christ's Letter 1. In this letter, Christ speaks of his reasons for returning to dictate these letters. He says that mankind brings their own woes upon them through their thoughts and actions. Explains why his true mission on earth was not recorded properly. Says there is no such thing as sin against God. Neither is our true source of being understood. Describes his 6 weeks in the desert and what really took place, what he learned, and how the knowledge changed him from rebel to master and healer. Introduction. I, the Christ, take this opportunity to speak directly to you. I have come to rectify the misinterpretations placed on the teachings given when known as Jesus in Palestine more than 2,000 years ago. These letters are being put through one who, during the past 40 years, has been spiritually sensitive and dedicated enough to receive my words and act on them. These letters are truth. They transcend all religious doctrines in the world. These letters will liberate you. These letters are for all people who are searching for meaning to existence, purpose in their lives, strength to face the daily struggle to live and endure hardship, sickness, despair, and inspiration for those who aspire to greater spiritual awareness in their daily lives. You might say that these letters are a master's course for those who are ready to put foot to the path which I traveled when on earth in Palestine. You may doubt that the above words are true. As you read these pages and go into the facts I am giving you concerning existence and the origins of personality, you will realize that this truth could only have come from the highest source. Those who have difficulty in understanding the letters should read them a page at a time. Then put them aside and meditate. Gradually, the meaning will seep into your consciousness, for these pages are a link between your consciousness and my transcendent consciousness. Come to these letters with a mind as free of ideas and beliefs and prejudice as a very little child before it is indoctrinated with human belief. Bring me your uncluttered mind, a seeking mind, and I will fill it with true treasure, the treasure of highest knowledge, which, as you absorb it, will lighten your daily load and lead you into green pastures of brightest light, signifying abundance, joy, rapture, and fulfillment of every need. You will come to know how it feels to be abundantly blessed with all that exists beyond your present human comprehension. These letters are sent to all people throughout the world with my compassion and love. As you read them, you will feel the love and the compassion and will come to realize that your daily struggles with existence were never intended for you. There is no need for you to experience pain and stress when you understand, absorb, and practice the truth of existence consistently. The purpose behind these letters. These letters are intended to bring enlightenment to the world generally, to enable humanity to construct a new consciousness during the next 2,000 years. These letters are the seeds of the future spiritual evolution of humankind. Note well, it is the spiritual evolution of the human consciousness that brings about the mental and physical evolution in your personal and global lives and brings humanity into ever more harmonious states of well-being. If you find this hard to believe, reflect on the past 2,000 years and see what has been accomplished since I last spoke to people in person. There has been a gradual evolutionary trend towards the brotherly love I constantly preached to the Jews. When I walked the earth, there was no such humanitarian organizations as you have now. Ambition, greed, and self-gratification were regarded as normal behavior. There was little brotherly love, even amongst the Jews, whose prophets, for generations, had exhorted them to love their neighbors as themselves. As humanity has developed its capacity for brotherly love, so has humanity made life more pleasant and comfortable for itself in the form of mutual consideration, courtesy, kindness, and in the provision of hospitals, child welfare societies, care for the aged, human rights movements, and many other institutions devoted to the improvement of the human condition. All these have been born in the hearts and minds of those who sincerely heeded my original words spoken in Palestine, urging people towards brotherly love and compassion for their fellow men. The form of spiritual caring and brotherly love gained tremendous impetus in the 19th century, when my words were preached with renewed sincerity and intensity from pulpits and gladly received by earnest and sincere congregations. Preachers and congregations were, by that time, spread worldwide on every continent. The Sabbath was truly regarded as a day of rest, and the thoughts of the majority of Christian people were lifted to the contemplation of the power of God. Such a worldwide cessation from normal duties and occupations meant that a 24-hour-long elevation of conscious thought towards the divine creative power created a regular and powerful human divine consciousness underpinning and interthreading human lives. Human petition drew the power of the divine into the human consciousness and human experience, and led directly to growth and expansion in every facet of human life. However, people did not yet know how to mentally direct divine power into spiritual rather than ego channels of creativity. Consequently, the expansion of collective consciousness brought evil results arising out of the ego power, as well as the good results produced by the spiritual consciousness of inspired and enlightened people. Note well, for this reason, I have come expressly to explain to you a vitally important fact of existence. Please read carefully. It is this: your personal consciousness is entirely responsible for whatever comes into your life and personal experience. It is your personal consciousness which brings you good or evil. In your subconscious, you bring through strongly imprinted but hidden recollections of past traumas, emotions of past life or lives, which can erupt and color your present consciousness. Your specific and impassioned prayer for alleviation of some kind may be answered, but it will avail you little in the long term if your mind and heart continually operate in contravention of the universal laws of love, and you live in a mindset of constant criticism. Universal laws of existence relate only to activities of consciousness and are exact and undeviating. They are not rewards or punishment from God. I repeat, are not punishment from God. They relate to the causative factor of consciousness, which attract, magnetize electrical particles that thus bond together and appear to the world as outer visible solid forms and experiences. Note well. Sometimes people make powerfully prayerful contact with the divine reality behind and within all creation. It responds, and its activity is shortly revealed as necessary improvements within the personal and national life. And people may exclaim, "This is a miracle." But in the long term, the state of the personal or national consciousness will again reassert itself in the experiences and will reproduce the same negative effects in health or affairs as they did previously. You cannot effect permanent changes in your lives unless you change your consciousness. Therefore, people must pray and strive at all times to achieve unconditional love. For in the 20th century, human mental abilities outstripped their spiritual development. Scientists thought they could explain away the origins of creation and ascribe them to accident. As a direct result, people ditched morality and began to give way utterly to self-will. They set in motion a new momentum of menace in the world, for they began to create a new form of world ego consciousness directly in opposition to the nature of the divine, unconditional love. The human consciousness blocked the inflow of the divine. Note well, the ever-increasing lurid imaginings of a few people, which would have been contained locally a century ago, now became a contagious mental infection, glorified in literature, films, theater, spreading worldwide, creating a global human consciousness similar to their own, expressed as sexual excess, violence, and perversions. This mental infection first manifests as egocentric modes of living and the creation of technical devices which have created serious health disorders, climatical changes, crop failures, environment deterioration, extinction of living creatures, and wholesale slaughter of human beings. Mental infection manifests in the human personality as deranged and destructive behavior, drug taking, abominable cruelty and depravity, gangster operations, and sexual excesses. Thus has a vicious circle of malignancy and perversions of thought and activities been created by entertainment and media magnets. The purpose: to capture egocentric public vested interest. Your TV and cinema screen has become the new Bible of human behavior. Personal tragedies unknown to humankind a century ago have become rife, and people live in fear of walking the streets. Households are barricaded behind high walls. Family and social problems are taken into regular public debate, and so the saga of human misery is perpetuated. This is the beast stalking your lands and feeding a miasma of beastliness into innocent minds. It will be perpetuated until my Christ knowledge is acknowledged, accepted, and lived by the majority of people on earth. Because this knowledge will show you how to get back on the true path of life in order to start creating the kind of lives you truly desire. Because I am unconditional love, I am speaking the truth which many spiritual minds suspect, but which is rejected by those who are spiritually blind at the moment. These words are not spoken to threaten or punish you, but to alert you to the source of all the unspeakable horrors which daily fill your newspapers and TV screens. It is only my love for all people that forces me to descend through the various levels of consciousness to reach the dimension of human depravity, to warn you of its consequences in your present lives. Note well, important. You wonder from whence has come the HIV virus, which attacks man's precious self-defense system, the immune system, and also targets his abilities to procreate. This virus, if left to spread unchecked, not by drugs, by spiritual awareness, will wipe out the unwary. The enlightened will avoid these and other pitfalls of existence. Wake up! Realize your own strong consciousness impulses are life impulses. They are highly creative electromagnetic impulses. When they are of a virulent, violent, aggressive, murderous nature, they emit electrical particles of virulent, violent, aggressive, murderous consciousness, which take form as virulent viruses in the air, spreading from one innocent person to another. What is born and nurtured in the diseased mind eventually takes on form in the physical world. This is not punishment from God, as the churches may teach you. It is a scientific fact of existence. Therefore, it is a matter of extreme urgency for all spiritually minded people to set aside infantile imaginings to perceive clearly the truth of creation and existence. My message to all churches. I, the Christ, have come expressly to tell you the truth about the origins of the human personality. I will explain exactly why and how mankind has been given a natural inbuilt propensity for self-will and a controlling desire for self-gratification and self-defense. This is not sin, but part of the natural creative processes. There is no punishment from on high. Men, through the willful and harmful exercise of their ego power, draw to themselves their own punishment. Note well, for this reason, just as scientific school textbooks become redundant as the human mind discovers and absorbs more advanced scientific knowledge, so should the present form of Christianity, built upon spurious doctrines centered around my crucifixion, be allowed to die a natural death. Note well, your present global crisis, introducing a new breakdown of international law, and laying the foundation for future global terrorism, clearly indicates that no religion in the world possesses the requisite knowledge and effective leadership to initiate changes in human mental patterns, which will lead directly to peace and prosperity. The true spiritual leader. The true spiritual leader will be able to show their congregations how and why modern mindsets have created the calamities and horrors which have been created in consciousness and are only just beginning to make themselves fully felt in your midst as diverse forms of pestilence and earthquakes, floods, famines, wars, revolutions, and other tragedies. Be assured, no evil which comes to your earth is a natural disaster. Everything inimical to your perfect welfare is bred first in your human consciousness, and then given form within your global existence. This is what I tried to tell the Jews when I walked the earth, and wept when they laughed and refused to believe it. They called me a madman. Let not the churches make the same mistake. Because the churches have been moribund, cemented into rituals and dogmas, their priests and pastors have been unable to meet the evolving spiritual needs of ardent seekers of truth. As a result, the churches are emptying. If they are to endure, the churches must put aside their differences and have the humility to accept that inspiration does not necessarily come to earth in ways acceptable to themselves. They must remember that I, the Christ, was not acceptable to the Jews. The churches must keep open minds and hearts to receive whatever they intuitively feel is a higher truth than that to which they presently cling, and to abandon the old beliefs which have permitted the beast to take control of human thought. Pray sincerely with all your souls, minds, hearts, for true enlightenment, rather than a reiteration of old and false beliefs. Wake up and accept that these rituals and past beliefs have not fulfilled my words to mankind when I promised that greater things than I did would you do. Meanwhile, until true enlightenment comes to you after much meditation and prayer, teach, demonstrate, and live brotherly love with all the strength of soul, heart, and mind, minute by minute in your daily lives. Because to combat the global destructive consciousness forces, humanity must make every effort to move on swiftly to the next stage of its development. Urgent need for a higher vision. It must be widely accepted there is a higher vision to strive to implement in your daily lives. It is only by reaching for a higher vision that the physical world will be rescued from wholesale annihilation. Without the vision either for the self or for the world, there can be no spiritual evolution or the achievement of those things greatly desired. At the present time, your perception of life is one of travail and deprivation. These beliefs are shockingly depicted and reinforced by your TV viewing. They later bring upon you the misery you hope will never happen to you. Therefore, to save you from your own folly expressed through the media and TV, the human consciousness must be speedily uplifted to see what I saw in the desert. The reality of love behind and within all existence. Note well, when this great truth is both perceived and warmly acknowledged, the reality of love will begin to manifest itself in multiple ways in every living thing and in the environment itself. The experience of abundance and joy will reinforce the consciousness of abundance and joy. And so, a spiritual spiral of ever more exalted and wondrous living will be set in motion. When the true nature of being is fully understood, humanity will move on to the next rung of spiritual evolution and will put into motion a new and blessed form of human endeavor and personal experience. To achieve these goals, humanity must first gain insight into what and who you are. What and who you are. A new and important question is already coming into people's consciousness. Who are you, really, behind the facade you present to the world? What does it take to be real? It is this question of who you really are which is answered on every level of your being within these pages. And if you can accept as your own guidelines for daily living all that I understood during my 6 weeks desert experience, you too will eventually become whole and real, even as I became whole and real before I commenced my ministry of healing and teaching. Since there are few people in the world who would regard themselves as whole at this present time, you must surely recognize that there is the most urgent necessity for me to intrude into your minds to lead you into a new way of thought and feeling. Such a change in consciousness will bring you into divine harmony with reality and better living conditions and security. To be able to do this work of reconstruction within your consciousness, I must first impress on your minds, and you must accept, there was much that I taught in Palestine which men were not yet ready to receive. Significantly, it has never been publicly questioned why there is no record of my early life as a young man. What was the true reason for such an all-important omission? Equally significant, although I spent 6 weeks in the desert after my baptism and emerged from the experience as a teacher and healer, not one writer has even attempted to describe what actually took place during that time, other than that I was tempted of the devil and was with the wild beasts, and the angels were with him. There is not the slightest hint as to what happened to me in the desert, which would enable me to come back to towns and villages, proclaiming the kingdom of God is within, and to speak in the synagogues with such authority that the Jewish elders were astonished. The truth regarding my human state was, by common consent of my disciples, suppressed to give greater credence to my supposed divinity and ministry. According to the Gospels, it was said of me that I was the only Son of God. Why, then, did I frequently refer to myself as the Son of Man? I specifically made these statements to counteract the prevalent beliefs in my divinity and to impress on people's minds that I was of the same physical origins as themselves. I intended them to understand that what I could do, they could also do, if they only had my knowledge and followed my instructions for right thinking and right action. So many myths have arisen around my earthly person and my spiritual consciousness that it is time to be rid of them as completely as possible, since they are preventing people from evolving spiritually. You, who have been indoctrinated with religious teachings, must try to understand that when describing my life, my disciple gospelers related only what they personally remembered, which fully supported their account of my supernatural activities. They also included much that had been spoken of me by others during the 30-odd years following my death. After such a lapse of time and inevitable embroidery of truth, how could they possibly write an authoritative biography of me and of what really happened, or properly explain my true spiritual perceptions, which gave birth to my words and miracles? Only one person can write from this standpoint, and that is myself. Therefore, these letters will bring you my truth in a way that no spectator could possibly tell it, no matter how well they thought they understood my thinking. For this reason, over 40 years, my recorder's mind has been systematically cleansed of all orthodox teachings, and the system of communication between us has been perfected. If my truth expressed in these letters differs from much written in your New Testament, is it to be wondered at or rejected for that reason? Therefore, I am descending in consciousness briefly, as near as necessary to your plane of consciousness, to describe my life and teachings over 2,000 years ago. My place in history. I must first point out that my life and person were briefly referred to in The History of the Jews, written by Josephus for the Roman governor, and presented to the Roman emperor. Josephus briefly noted that Jesus, who attempted to overthrow law and order and the governance of the Romans, was punished and crucified. It has been argued that this was some other Jesus recorded by Josephus. But this is not so. I, who later became the Christ, who performed so-called miracles of healing and materialization, was the insurrectionist. But I was no rabble-rouser. I did not deliberately stir people up to defy the Romans and disrupt law and order. I was a rebel against existing Jewish traditions, and because when I emerged from my 6-week sojourn in the desert, I saw a better way to think and live, and I tried to pass on my knowledge to my fellow Jews with little success. It is important you should understand that the pressure of public opinion weighed with my followers. Whilst they truly believed I had brought a soul-saving message to the Jews and was the Messiah, the Son of God, they were also of the world, trying to relate to the world as best they could. Therefore, although they knew my reactive feelings toward the Jewish beliefs, they were not happy to dispense with the Old Testament altogether, since it had supported and kept the Jews together throughout their history. In the interests of preserving what they thought to be valuable in the old dispensation, they suppressed any description of the person I was. My disciples and Paul built their own edifice of sacred beliefs on what they wanted to preserve from my life and teachings. They only taught and consolidated what they deemed to be valuable to people, Jews and Gentiles alike, at that time and in the future. Consequently, they distilled what they could use, and they let go most of what I termed the secrets of the kingdom of God, for they never understood them, nor found them desirable in the creation of a new perception of the divine, the Father. To preserve the Jewish belief in salvation from punishment for sins by means of sacrifice in the temple, the person of Jesus was adopted as the supreme sacrifice who had paid for men's sins by my crucifixion. This belief served many purposes at that time. It gave my death on the cross a valid and heroic reason. It proved to the people that I was the Son of God who had carried out a specific mission to the very end of my life. This belief also proved to be of great comfort to Jews when their temple was destroyed by the Romans, and led to many converts taking place. Many sects of Jews, and Gentiles also, did not believe in life after death. Consequently, it was greatly comforting to hear that Jesus Christ had overcome death and retained his body. to much human thought at that time. Life was not possible without a body. Therefore, life after death could only mean the resurrection of the body. It also kept my name constantly alive in the minds of people. I was the historic figure who had valiantly died to ensure that men should be freed of all fear of hell and damnation. Providing they believed in me, they could walk as freed men. It is only because my name has been kept alive to this very day that I am now able to come to you and give you the truth I so dearly wanted to share with people over 2,000 years ago. My early life and experiences in the desert. I was born in Palestine. My mother was convinced that I would be a Messiah. Contrary to popular belief, I was not a saintly child. When taken to the temple, aged 12 years old, to be interviewed by the chief priests to determine whether I would be fit to enter Jewish religious training, I was rejected as being too opinionated. Bitterly disappointed, my mother took me home again and did her best to raise me in the sanctity which marked her own demeanor at all times. This was an impossible task, for I was, above all things, an individualist and unruly in behavior. I resented my mother's guidance and her attempted discipline. As a youth, I became unmanageable, a true rebel. I rejected my mother's staunch adherence to the Jewish faith and traditions, preferring laughter to sanctimonious attitudes. I refused to learn a trade, which would have bound me down to routine. I chose to mix with all and sundry of the poorer classes, drank with them, knew prostitutes, and enjoyed talking, arguing, laughing, and being bone idle. When I needed money, I went into the vineyards for a day or two, or took other jobs paying me enough to eat and drink and give me the leisure I craved. For all my many shortcomings as a human being, my careless, easy, indolent attitudes, my self-will and egocentric determination to think my thoughts irrespective of what others might try to tell me, I cared about people very deeply. I was deeply emotional. In your present speech forms, you would call me overreactive, over-emotional. I had a warm, compassionate, empathetic heart. I was deeply moved in the presence of sickness, affliction, and poverty. I was a staunch supporter of what you call the underdog. You might say I was a people's person. I lived with them closely, in a spirit of camaraderie. I listened to their woes, understood, and cared. It is important to understand my true origins and my early youthful characteristics, because these were the goads which pushed and prodded me into eventual Christhood. What I most strongly detested and resisted was the misery, the sickness, and poverty I saw around me. It infuriated me, and I became passionately, vociferously angry to see people dressed in rags, thin and hungry, diseased, crippled, yet heartlessly browbeaten by Jewish leaders who burdened them with meaningless traditional laws and observances, threatening them with Jehovah's punishment if they did not obey. I declared to all who would listen to me that these poor people had enough to bear without being crushed by senseless measures restrictive of pleasure. What was the point of life at all if we were not born to be happy? I refused to believe in a just God according to Jewish traditions. The biblical prophetic warnings of Jehovah's judgment and anger against people disgusted me. People were human, after all, doing whatever their human natures prompted them to do. They had been born sinful, so why should they be judged and condemned to lives of suffering and poverty because they had broken the 10 Commandments? Where was the sense in such statements? To me, this Jewish belief depicted an illogical, cruel God, and I wanted nothing to do with him. It seemed to me that if such a deity existed, it followed that mankind was doomed to eternal misery. The simplicity and freedom I found on the hillsides, the plains, the lakes, and the mountains refreshed my inmost spirit and quietened my angry murmuring against the Jewish God. Consequently, I refused to believe a word that the Jewish elders tried to teach me. However, during my middle 20s, a new line of questioning took possession of my thoughts. As I walked ever more frequently alone in the hills, my rebellion was gradually replaced by an all-consuming longing to know and understand the true nature of that which must surely inspire and respire through creation. I reviewed my lifestyle and saw what suffering my actions had caused my mother and many other people. Although I felt such deep compassion for the weak and suffering, my rebellious nature had prompted much thoughtless and selfish behavior towards my family. My underlying love for them now welled up in me, and I found myself becoming equally rebellious against my past behavior. I heard talk about John the Baptist and the work he was doing amongst the Jews who came to listen to his words, even from Jerusalem. I decided to visit him to be baptized myself. On my way to the River Jordan, I felt exhilarated at the prospect of being baptized and starting a new life. I knew that, despite my unruly emotionalism, I had also been born with a keen intelligence and a gift for insightful, impressive debate, which I had used willfully and negatively, leading people into unruly arguments. I had thrown my talents away by pursuing a life of self-will, idleness, and pleasure. As a result, I had forfeited all respect from others. Neither did I possess any self-respect? For the first time, I found this to be intolerable. It occurred to me that, in the future, I could and must put my natural gifts to better use. Instead of just making a noise, perhaps I could find a way to lighten the burdens of those whom I so deeply pitied. Up to that time, I had been of little practical use to anyone. My baptism. When I entered the water in the River Jordan to be baptized by John, I expected to feel nothing more than relief that I had, for once, taken a positive step in reforming my behavior. I expected to feel a new determination to go home and astonish my mother and neighbors with my new kindly attitudes toward them. What really happened when John baptized me was an experience completely different to anything I had ever thought possible. I felt a great wave of tremendous energy surge through my body. I was literally stunned by it. As I staggered out of the river, I felt myself elevated in consciousness in a most extraordinary way. A great inflow of glowing happiness uplifted me to a state of ecstasy. I was enraptured and aware of a great light. Stumbling, I moved away from the river and walked, not knowing where I was going. I continued on, unseeingly, into the desert. Please note, my 6 weeks in the desert were a time of total inner cleansing of my human consciousness. Old attitudes, beliefs, and prejudices were dissolved. The time has come for me to share with receptive people all that I felt, saw, realized, and understood. To help people abandon the age-old imaginative pictures of a biblical deity, I will avoid referring to God by that word and will use a terminology designed to stretch your minds to embrace what really is beyond all earthly form, color, sound, emotion, and comprehension. This terminology will become ever more meaningful as you persevere in meditation and prayer. What I felt when in the desert. I was uplifted into inner radiant light and felt vibrant and wondrously alive with power. I was filled with ecstasy and joy, and I knew beyond all doubt that this power was the true creator out of which all created things had been given their being. This glorious interior harmony, peace, and sense of perfect fulfillment, needing nothing more to be added to that beautiful moment, was the very nature of the reality, the creative power giving life to creation and existence. What I saw, realized, and perceived when in the desert. I was lifted into another dimension of conscious perception, which enabled me to see the truth concerning life and existence. I saw lucidly and clearly what was real and what was false in man's thinking. I realized that this creative power I was experiencing was infinite, eternal, universal, filling all space beyond sky, oceans, earth, and all living things. I saw it was mind power. It was the creative power of mind. There was no point where this divine creative power of mind was not. I realized that human mind was drawn from divine creative mind, but was only a candle lit by the sun. At times, my human sight was so spiritually heightened, I could see through rocks, earth, sand. These now appeared to be only a shimmer of tiny motes. I realized that nothing was really solid. When I had moments of doubt that this could be so, the changes in the phenomena stopped taking place, and much later, I discovered that my thoughts, if strongly imbued with conviction, could effect changes in the shimmer of motes, what science presently calls electrically charged particles, and therefore produce changes in the appearance of the rock or whatever I was studying. It was at this point that I came to realize the powerful effect that conviction or unwavering faith had on the environment when stating a command or even a belief. What was even more startling was my mind-opening cosmic consciousness realization that all I had been witnessing was really the creative power of divine mind itself, made visible in the shimmer of tiny motes. Not only this, its appearance could be profoundly affected by the activity of human thought. I realized there was nothing solid in the universe. Everything visible was manifesting a differing state of consciousness, which determined the composition and form of the shimmer of motes. Therefore, all outer form was an expression of the inner consciousness. Life and consciousness, I realized, were one and the same thing. It was impossible to say, this is life, and that is consciousness. Consciousness was life, and life was consciousness, and was the creative power of both. Divine universal mind beyond, within, and behind the universe. I realized that people placed highest importance on individuality and form. They could not imagine mind or intelligence operating in any effective way other than through the medium of individual form. Because of this, the Jews had created a mental image of a vast supreme being having all the attributes, positive and negative, of a human being. Thus was it possible for prophets to believe in and speak of Jehovah's anger, threats of punishment, visitations of sickness and plagues in response to human waywardness. But these mental images, I realized, were myths. They did not exist. I perceived that in any dimension of existence, it was the mind, the intelligence exhibited, which was the all-important factor relating to creation and man himself. Therefore, Genesis should be rewritten. Before creation was universal mind, creative power behind and within creation itself. Having seen so clearly, beyond all dispute, that the creative power of universal mind was everywhere within the infinity of the skies and active within earthly forms as well, I was inwardly directed to look around me and saw only gravel and rock. Then, suddenly, I was presented with a picture of a beautiful land in which were growing every conceivable plant, shrub, and tree. Even birds flitted in the trees, and animals grazed the grass. Watching this vision with amazement, I saw that plants and trees, every one of them, and yes, even birds and animals, in reality, were composed of hundreds of communities of infinitely tiny entities, your modern scientists call them cells, working continuously in an entirely harmonious spirit of cooperation to produce the substance and various organs of the inner system and the outer appearance of the completed living entity. I contemplated this wonderful activity for a long time, although time was no longer of any importance to me. As I gazed and gazed, I thought, who would have guessed that within the outer covering of fur, feather, skin, there was such intense activity within tiny communities of entities working together to give life, form, nutrition, healing, protection, endurance to the bodies of so many different species. It was the intelligently performed work which attracted my attention. Therefore, work, I realized, was an integral part of the creative power activity from the very least entity, cell, within living systems to the most advanced entity in the universe, man himself. In the systems of all living things, all the labor was under the direction, ultimately, of the divine creative power, in whom were the plans and designs of creation. I saw that these plans and designs were, in reality, consciousness forms and could be termed words, since each word signifies a very special consciousness form. The word. Hence, the original word in creative power consciousness becomes manifested in the visible world. The word, and therefore the consciousness pattern, remains within the divine creative mind, continually bringing forth its own. I could see then that everything in the universe did live, move, and have its being in the creative power of universal mind, which was infinite and eternal, and was the only true reality behind all manifestations of individualized form. I was filled with praise that everything in the world was out of, and yet within, this superlative, creative power of divine mind. I marveled at all this secret activity forever taking place in all living things, including human bodies, and wondered how it was that such infinitely small units worked intelligently according to specified plans to produce unerringly the proposed form, tree trunk, leaf, flower, fruit, insects, birds, animals, and human bodies. I then realized, even more clearly, that the creative power was the very source of all intelligent activity in the universe. If mankind possessed intelligence, it was only because he had drawn it from the universal source of all being. Furthermore, I was shown that the divine creative power always worked according to a certain fundamental and exact principles of construction. I was shown that, just as men have clear characteristics and a well-defined nature in their self-presentation to the world at large, so did the creative power possess a clearly defined nature, distinct characteristics, which could be clearly recognized in the manner that all living things, plants, animals, birds, men, were constructed and maintained. I saw that these principles and characteristics, clearly observable in the process of creation, were set in variable laws governing all of existence. Laws, principles of creation. These laws are so much part of life that they are never questioned. They are undeviating and consistent. But there would be no such laws if there were no creative, intelligent power manifesting itself through the universe. These principles of creation, the characteristics of the creative power itself, are as follows. I am translating them into your present tense because these principles are eternal. 1. The nature of the creative power is growth. Everything living always grows. Growth is a universal characteristic, an undeviating principle of existence. 2. The nature of the creative power is nutrition and nourishment. Nutrition and nourishment are a normal and marvelously organized process within bodies, which is evident to all who take the trouble to consider them. Nutrition is provided for all living things according to individual preferences, and the food is digested to promote health and well-being. When little creatures are born, milk is already supplied within the mother, ready and waiting for the newborn. This, too, is a mystifying principle of existence none can deny. No science can explain why such a fortuitous function within the system, ensuring survival of the species, should have originally come into being. The actual function itself may be understood, but not the why and the mainspring of the function. 3. The nature of the creative power is healing. Healing is a natural characteristic of existence and can be said to be natural perfecting process, which takes place to ensure individual comfort, but none can explain what prompts the activity of healing. 4. The nature of the creative power is protection. Protection is an integral characteristic of creative power, and all of its seeming miraculous activity in the world is geared toward protection. Today, your medical textbooks describe the various protective systems in your body, but when I was in the desert, I saw the characteristic of protection inherent in the intelligent, creative power in the following way. As plants, birds, and animals were presented to me for inspired observation, I could see how every need of protection in bodies has been lovingly supplied with the greatest attention to detail. 5. This characteristic of protection is combined with the other dynamic characteristic of fulfillment of need. This was made clearly apparent in the provision of hair, fur, and feathers to protect the skin of living creatures and to provide warmth in the cold and shelter in the heat. I saw that the tender endings of important and sensitive fingers and toes were all provided with appropriate protection of hoof and nail. Eyebrows protected eyes from sweat. Eyelids and lashes protected eyes from dust and damage. I realized that those animals which attracted flies were equipped with the kind of tails which would most speedily get rid of them. What a happy, joyous kind of love and caring were expressed in these small physical attributes which seemed so small and inconsequential, and yet had such a profound bearing on the comfort of all living things. These physical luxuries, added to the basic physical design, were clearly the product of an intelligence which intended creation to be comfortable and happy, free of the stress which would have been experienced by man and beast if these luxury items had not been given them. Even the natural functions were so intelligently and comfortably designed as to call forth thanksgiving. Everything tucked so neatly out of sight. How blessed, how fortunate was mankind to be born into a life so wonderfully provided for. Again, my praises soared, and I was lifted on an inner golden light of rapturous wonder. For I now saw that, in addition to freedom from stress, living creatures were also meant to express the exuberant, loving nature of the creative power. For this reason, they were equipped with limbs, arms, hands, legs and feet, fingers and toes, to enable them to move about, run, leap, and dance, to be able to express their inmost thoughts and feelings. I even felt that if mankind longed to fly and grow wings and believed with all their hearts they could do so, eventually they would begin growing something additional to enable them to fly. It was at this point of understanding of the nature of the creative power that I came into the full consciousness of the love directing the works of the universal, intelligent, creative power. As I pondered this love, I realized that the mother in creation nourishes, protects, fulfills the needs, and tries to promote healing of offspring. This is the activity of love. Number 6. The innate characteristic of the loving, intelligent, creative power, which has given creation its individual form and being, is work. It works for us, in us, and through us. Its work is always, always, always prompted by love. This cosmic revelation filled me with joy and astonishment. What a wonderful world we lived in. It was the culminating point in my enlightenment and my overall view of the truth concerning the source of all being. I had already seen the reality of the physical bodies composed of various communities of identical, infinitely tiny entities working in a spirit of cooperation and harmony to produce the various components of the body: flesh, bone, blood, to eyes and hair. The only difference between these communities lay in the type of work demanded by their common goals. Surely the divine impulse behind all this intelligent, purposeful activity in the body was both the inspiration and foundation of man's own conduct when people worked in unison to produce a planned objective. They drew intelligence and purpose from the creative power, yet how very different was man's behavior when engaged in earthly construction or any other communal project, for it was inevitably characterized by arguments and dissension. I was brought to a realization of the infinite power of the intelligent creativity, ever active within creation, maintaining order, cooperation, harmony, daily productivity, unequaled by man anywhere, at any time. Number 7. Survival was a natural characteristic of the creative power. In every case, the most wonderful provision had been made for all living things to grow, be healed of illnesses and injury, nourished in order to keep the body healthy, and to produce its own kind in order to ensure survival on this earth. This was the only reality mankind could be absolutely sure of, and its activity was consistent, year in and year out. The sun, moon, stars, all remained in their places for millennia, and it was recognized that they all possessed their own paths of movement. This phenomena was all part of the grand scheme for survival in creation. If this was so, how could there not be survival of the eternal flame of loving, intelligent, creative power hidden within the created entities of every kind in the universe? Therefore, this world was but a shadow and image of the hidden worlds of loving, intelligent, creative power beyond this dimension. The reality of the entirety of creation lay beyond this visible world. Number 8. The inherent characteristic of loving, intelligent, creative power was rhythm. I saw that there was rhythm in operation in the world. Everything was subject to seasons, which gave a blossoming and burgeoning of life, a growing season coming up to the ripening and harvest, and the production of seeds, which ensure the survival of plant life. Then there was the gradual dying away and rest period of winter. But nothing created and living was allowed to become extinct. The sun and moon expressed these characteristics within the universe. This rhythm could even be seen in the females of living things. Therefore, everything in creation had its due time for appearance and harvest. It followed that man himself was subject to tides of growth and success and tides of dormancy. Number 9. The inherent characteristic of the loving, intelligent, creative power was law and order. The undeviating order and reliability apparent in creation, even governing the tiny entities, cells, within the body, were astonishing and far transcended any human endeavor. Therefore, the entire universe was operating under a system of perfect law and order. I realized on ever higher and higher levels of spiritual exaltation that the creative power exhibited intelligent purposefulness and loving concern for all living things. I realized that life was not something nebulous or amorphous, but an intelligent, loving, creative power which I could actually feel within myself as a tremendously heightened state of being, perception, radiance, ecstasy, joy, love. I knew myself to be one with it, filled with it, and I was one with everything around me, and one with the sky and stars. And most wonderful and glorious of all, the very nature and function of this Father creative power was to work in order to create joy, beauty, and comfort, to ensure mankind's well-being, to work within mankind to provide interior joy, health, and comfort, and to work through mankind, inspiring him with new realization and understanding. Wonderful vistas of glorious creativity came to mind. Once we became truly at one, purified channels and instruments of the intelligent creative power, we could gradually ascend in consciousness until we truly expressed through our minds and hearts the very nature of the universal creative power. Then, life on earth would indeed become a state of heaven at all times, and we would enter into a state of eternal life. This must surely be the true goal behind creation, I thought. And it came to me with a surge of elation and loving joy that this was the purpose for which man had been evolved and developed. But even at this present time, although mankind was so very imperfect in his behavior, absolutely nothing was impossible to him in the future, since, despite his wrongdoing, he was one with the creative power, and the creative power was within him, giving him life, limb, and everything else he needed. All of this realization lifted me to the heights of rapture, elation, and sublime ecstasy, so that I was scarcely able to bear it. I felt my body must dissolve with the expansion of power within me. I was irradiated with light and could see it all around me, illuminating the desert scene. My heart sang in praises. How wonderful and beautiful was the loving creative power which worked in, through, and for us, unceasingly. What a miracle was creation! I cried out loud, "You are the source of all being, both creator and also manifested within and through the created. There is nothing in the entire universe which is apart or separate from the limitless, eternal infinity of divine life, creative power consciousness that you are. How then is it possible that mankind is so sinful? And why do people suffer disease, misery, and poverty? Tell me, O loving, loving Father, creative power, because I have been heavily burdened with the pain of their miserable lives." Then I was shown the reality of the earthly condition of all living things. I felt immense excitement because at last I would be able to understand how it was that such a loving, divine creative power could allow its creation to endure such misery. I was shown that every living thing in creation should be radiantly healthy, cared for, nourished, protected, healed, maintained in peace and plenty, prospered within an orderly society of beings, extending only love to each other. However, at the moment of creation, two basic impulses came into being, ensuring individuality, and it was these which controlled mankind's consciousness. These impulses were explained to me in detail, but this knowledge is reserved for a future letter, when you will be able to better understand it. I was shown the following vivid vision. First of all, I saw a newborn babe as light, a life form of creative power. As the baby grew into childhood, then manhood, I saw the pure light of the creative power gradually dimmed and then obscured altogether in him by a dense wrapping of chains and thongs. I questioned the meaning of the vision, and there came to my mind a clear understanding which may be expressed in the following words. From birth to death, people believe and insist that their five senses of sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste correctly predicate the reality of themselves and the universe around them. Therefore, because they draw their mind power direct from divine creative power, it is done to them according to their beliefs. Each thong represents a person's habitual thoughts, responses to people and events, prejudices, hates, animosities, anxieties, sorrows, all of which bind him down and shut out the light from his inner vision drawn from the creative power. Thus, he enters into darkness, but does not know it. He believes he is growing up and becoming mature in the ways of the world, which will enable him to forge ahead and make good, become successful, the aim of most people on earth. In fact, the more mature he becomes and versed in worldly ways, the more densely do his chains and thongs imprison him within the grip of the twin impulses of bonding rejection. Furthermore, each chain is forged out of selfish and deceitful desires, greed, aggression, violence, and rape. These chains hang heavy around him and burden the psyche, which is the creative consciousness power deep within him. Chain and thong will bind him tighter with every passing year until he realizes what he is doing to himself and sincerely repents each thong and chain and makes due restitution to others whom he has harmed. With this vision, I learned a most valuable aspect of existence. Man himself is born with all the potential to make a beautiful life for himself, but he, himself, by indulging his selfish desires and hatreds, creates a prison of misery for himself, from which there was no escape until such times as he realizes the truth of existence. All the problems of harsh existence lay within the thought processes of man himself. Only people's consciousness forms, their thoughts, words, feelings, actions created a dense barrier between their consciousness and the universal creative consciousness interpenetrating the universe in every leaf, tree, insect, bird, animal, and human being. Laws of existence. I was also shown the laws of existence controlling the human ability to create new circumstances and environment, relationships, achievement or failure, prosperity or poverty. Whatever man profoundly believes himself to be, good or bad, that will he become. Whatever man fears others will do to him, so will they do. Whatever man hopes that others will do to him, he must first do to them, since he is then creating a consciousness pattern which will return to bless him to the extent he has blessed others. Whatever disease man dreads, so will he become prey to it, for he will have created a consciousness pattern of the very thing he least wants to experience. Whatever is sent forth from man's mind and heart returns to him in due course in some form or another. But remember that like always breeds like. Strongly held emotional thoughts are consciousness seeds planted within a man's own orbit of consciousness. These will grow, bearing a like harvest for his reaping. These are the fruits of free will. There is no way that man may escape what he thinks, says, or does, for he is born of the divine creative consciousness power and is likewise creative in his imagining. Those who long for good for themselves must first give it to others. Let their very existence be a blessing to others. When such people are in harmony with all others, they are then perfectly attuned to the universal creative consciousness power, and they are brought into the flow of the Father nature, which is growth, protection, nourishment, physical, mental, spiritual, healing, fulfillment of need within a system of law and order. How can I describe for you my inner glow, my transcendent brightness and brilliance of joy and powerful feelings of love, which possessed and inflated my entire being with their intensity, until I cried out with the pressure within my mind and heart? It was so powerful, it seemed it would entirely dissolve my bodily form. As I received all this supreme, sublime understanding of the reality, our source of being, and the true nature of creation itself, and of mankind, I was uplifted in spirit, and my body became light as air. At that time, when I was thus elevated within the divine creative power itself, I was indeed almost a divine person myself, experiencing a high degree of the nature of the Father creative power within me, and feeling its own drive and caring concern for all humanity. Therefore, I could later say with truth, only I know and have seen the Father. In that moment, how I yearned to teach, heal, comfort, uplift, feed, take away people's pain and misery. I longed to release them from their fear of a mythical, avenging God. When I returned to tell them the truth, how I would emphasize the reality of the Father creative power, perfect love, supplying their every need. All they had to do was ask, seek, knock, and all their needs, of whatever kind, would be bestowed upon them. How joyously I would tell them the good news that redemption from suffering lay within their grasp, if they only took the necessary steps to cleanse their minds and hearts of the twin impulses of manifested being. This should be simple enough, I thought. One only needed understanding and self-control. I have descended towards your vibrations to refer back to my actual state of mind during the time I was in the desert. It will help your own understanding immeasurably if you try to enter my state of consciousness at that time. So many things, such as my works of healing and walking on water, will become clear to you. They will be seen to be a natural consequence of my new understanding of the Father creative power. If you read the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, their records will have new meaning for you. To return to my final hours of enlightenment, there I was in the desert, possessing the clear understanding that man himself, through no fault of his own, creates the barrier to attunement to the Father creative power. And now I was longing to hurry back and teach, heal, comfort, dry the tears of those I so greatly pitied. Yet I was reluctant to leave this hallowed place where I had been so illumined and transformed in spirit. On the other hand, what a wonderful future lay ahead of me. I would walk through all the cities, towns, villages, and tell everyone I met the good news, the kingdom of heaven, that place where all sickness disappeared and every need was supplied, was within them, because I knew that the Father and I were one. Now that my mind had been cleansed of the old thoughts and ideas, I would direct healing at their illness and disease. I would teach them how to relieve their poverty. When the Father consciousness within me began to dim, and I gradually returned to human consciousness, I became aware of knowing hunger and also a return of my human conditioning and thought. My reactions to my 6 weeks experience began to change. My usual human awareness of me and my desires took over my thoughts. Why, the most amazing and completely unexpected thing has happened to me, I exulted. I have been given knowledge beyond any yet given to any other man. I was jubilant with the realization that, at last, my doubt and rebelliousness against the avenging God of the traditional Orthodox Jews was vindicated. I had been right after all. Who had ever suspected the human mind could be so highly creative that a strongly held thought or desire would actually manifest itself in the visible realm? I realized that Moses must have known something of this, because he had accomplished some strange things when the Israelites were in dire need. He became a leader and changed the course of the Israelites previously enslaved in Egypt. I could return now and free my people from the rigid control of their own teachers. My hunger pains now became intense. It occurred to me that I could turn stones into bread to satisfy my longing for food, because I remembered that the Father creative power worked through my mind, and therefore everything in the universe would be subject to my command. I was about to speak the word which would change stones into bread, but something in me halted me abruptly. It came to me strongly that the Father creative consciousness was perfect protection, nourishment, fulfillment of need, and so the hunger would be taken care of if I asked the Father for relief. I realized that if the little I, the human me, in my need, used the creative power for selfish reasons, I would be erecting a barrier between the Father creative consciousness and myself, and everything I had just learned might well be taken away from me. This frightened me, and swiftly I asked the Father Creative Power for new strength to carry me back to habitations and Nazareth again. I also asked for relief of hunger in the form that would be right for me. Immediately, the hunger pang subsided, and I felt a surge of energy flow through my entire body. Thus I proved that all I had seen, heard, and understood was reality, and not some vain imagining born of my time in the desert, fasting and alone. My new energy enabled me to make haste over the rough tracks on my way out of the desert. On my way, I met a well-dressed man of sweet and pleasing countenance. He greeted me warmly, expressing concern on seeing my rough, unkempt appearance and loss of condition. Gladly, he sat me down on a rock and shared his excellent meat and bread with me. I wondered why he was in such a desolate place and where he had come from. In response to my questioning, he only smiled and seemed not the least surprised when I said I had been in the desert for so many days I had lost count of time. I explained how I was enlightened as to the true nature of the Creator of the world and shown the natural laws of existence. He only smiled and nodded. I am going back to my people to teach them everything I have learned, I said joyously. Why, I will be able to heal them and bring them release from every sickness and trouble. The stranger replied sadly, "It will take many millennia." I was about to rebuke his lack of faith when I realized he was gone. I knew then that a divine messenger had come to succor with good bread and meat, and compassionately give me warning that I might not find my mission so simple, despite my enthusiasm. I was deflated by his word of warning. My enthusiasm waned. The way to the first village on my road seemed endless. How a change in human thought produces a change of mood. It came to me that I could further prove the truth of all I had been shown by jumping over the edge of a precipice, which would greatly shorten my journey. As I was about to do this, it came to me forcibly that I was trying to prove my time of enlightenment was real. If I required such proof, then I was in a state of doubt, and I would probably kill myself. Besides, I had been shown that in every eventuality, I could lift my thoughts up to the Father Creative Consciousness and ask for a solution to every problem. How quickly I forgot the truth. So I prayed, passionately asking forgiveness for being weak enough to indulge my own fantasies and seeking my own way of doing things. Again, the answer came in renewed strength and a greater sureness of foot as I scrambled over the rough ground. I found, too, that I was covering long distances so quickly that it seemed that I had stepped outside normal time reckoning, and I was in a lighter dimension, where human experience was lifted above its heavy thraldom of exhausting expenditure of energy. Walking was so easy. It was now invigorating. I exulted in the fact that I had found the key to more abundant life. A while later, feeling so much at ease, my mind began to wander, and I thought about my meeting with the stranger and the kindness he had shown me. But I also remembered his warning and again my old nature reasserted itself, and I felt deeply rebellious that he should presume to tell me how my work would go. I decided he knew nothing about my future and set his warning aside. Why, I thought, with my knowledge, I could accomplish things no man has ever done before. Instead of struggling in a difficult life, I could begin to accumulate wealth easily, attract followers wherever I went, and share my knowledge with them to make their lives easier also. I could take away all pain and suffering. As I contemplated the many places I could visit so easily, I felt myself skimming the surface of the ground and rising until I reached the highest peak of a steep mountain overlooking the countryside below. There it was, all laid out before me. I felt my previous enthusiasm return. Why, it would be so simple to round up the people and share all my knowledge with them. I would become powerful, even famous, as the man who rescued mankind from all their sickness and troubles. I would gain their admiration and respect, and would no longer be remembered as an idle, worthless fellow. With a tremendous shock, all I had been taught so recently, but a few hours ago, returned to my mind with great force and clarity. Had I not been taught that the only way I could ever prosper was to abandon my self-will and turn to the Father for assistance in everything I undertook? Then I remembered that creation had its own special purposes to fulfill. The individualizing process had created the pull and push, the give and take in human behavior. Although these human characteristics caused people great anguish in their lives, was it not the anguish which forced them to seek better ways to live in order to find true happiness? I realized that the ills of mankind had their place in the human scheme of existence. Was it right for me to bring privileged information to people in order to nullify the effects of the individualizing process? I realized I had been thinking from the central point of my individuality, the ego, and it was the ego drive which built barriers between mankind and farther creative consciousness. Therefore, my central point of human desiring would have to be conquered if I was to live in perfect harmony with my Father, as was my sincere intention. And so I continued on my way, pondering what might lie ahead and how I might best overcome the impulses governing my humanhood in order to remain in the flow of Father consciousness from which I would draw inspiration, guidance, answers to problems, my daily nourishment, daily health, daily protection. In fact, I realized that whilst I remained within this daily flow of Father consciousness, no harm could ever come near me, and my every need would be met. And more importantly, the Father consciousness working through me would do whatever was required for people in dire need of healing and comfort. At all times, I must overcome my rebelliousness against the harsh realities of existence and listen to the inner voice and conform to the higher will of the Father. This higher will was perfect love, directed entirely at promoting my highest good. It would be extremely foolish, I realized, to continue along the path of self-will, which had dictated my behavior to that time. It was then that I was inspired to speak in parables to the people. Those who were ready to receive the knowledge would understand and make good use of it. But, as it turned out, even my disciples could not rid themselves sufficiently of Jewish doctrine to enable them to understand either the principle of consciousness or the activity of the divine creative power within creation. Until this time, it has remained a mystery to all except the spiritually enlightened. Even the spiritual words of enlightenment cannot be immediately, fully comprehended by the human mind. Therefore, these letters must be read slowly and accompanied by much meditation and prayer to be properly understood. Remember, unless you become as a child, getting rid of a useless clutter of beliefs, prejudices, resentments, ambitions, and ego drive, with a mind filled with wonder and utter faith, you will not be able to absorb these pages as you should. To become a child, you must make an effort to shed all past mental conditioning. If you are mentally, emotionally, physically suffering, it is only because whatever have been your most sincere beliefs, they have not been helpful to you. They have not promoted your well-being. Mindset. It is time to examine your mindset. Are you happy with it? You can make choices, and as you make them, you can call upon the Father to help you make the changes, and the help will surely be given you, providing you do not doubt. I therefore urge you to continue to read and absorb the following pages. I want to impress on you the strength of your mindset, which is the sum total of all your conscious and subconscious programming. It is essential you should understand that none of this human mindset has its origins in the spiritual dimension. It is entirely earthly and probably filled with mythical ideas, prejudices, misconceptions, resentments, buried memories of past hurts, and habitual methods of dealing with the ups and downs of life. Your human mindset, including any religious ideas or beliefs, determines your world, your relationships, experiences, successes, failures, happiness, and misery. It is even responsible for your sickness, disease, and accidents. Nothing happens by chance. Everything is woven out of the inner threads of your personal consciousness. Thoughts, expectations, beliefs in life, fate, God. You live in a world of your own making. This is why children raised in the same environment turn out differently. Each one has its own individual mindset, constructed according to inherent character traits. If, from birth, you had no developing mindset, you would be as unconscious as a statue, devoid of feeling, responses, and thought. Vacantly, you would stare at the world, and whilst there might be a great deal of activity around you, nothing would impinge on your consciousness, since you would be devoid of reaction. Nothing would make you happy or miserable, even if a bomb exploded in your vicinity. Without a mindset, you have no life, no development, no evil, no good. Your type of mindset determines the quality of your life. This is the very first truth of existence I want you to realize and understand fully. Furthermore, for as long as you live, you carry your mindset with you wherever you go. There is no escaping it, and day after day, it will continue to create for you the type of existence you have experienced in your past. Many people go through their entire lives believing they are unfortunate. They think that other people have been mean, unkind, ugly to them, and have made their lives thoroughly unhappy. They believe that other people quarrel with them and constantly make difficulties, while they are absolutely innocent of any provocation. On the contrary, other people are not to blame. It is the personal mindset which is attracting to them their negative conditions. Many people shy away from the suggestion that they alone are responsible for their troubles. It is more difficult for some people to face up to their inadequacies than it is for those who have the inner strength and self-confidence to look at themselves fairly and squarely. Sincere prayer draws the Father creative consciousness into the mind, quietly, secretly. It cleanses the human consciousness of all that the seeker no longer feels comfortable with. It is, of necessity, a very gradual process of inner cleansing and development. Emotional patterns. Your emotional patterns can be as damaging to your overall welfare as your mindset. Your mindset, together with your emotional patterns, are your creative tools. These together create the necessary outlines for future possessions, events, and circumstances. These creative tools work in your life whether you intend them to or not. It is far more difficult to discover your deep-seated emotional attitudes, either conscious or subconscious, than to recognize your mental conditioning. People can be possessed by negative emotional patterns and be quite unaware of them, since they are covered by the moment-to-moment emotions arising from the daily routine. To discover what your emotional patterns are, ask yourself questions along the following lines, and be totally honest with yourself. To try to hide from the truth of your emotional patterns is merely to deceive yourself and hold yourself back from achieving the joyous state of existence you were intended to enjoy. How do you feel about life? I want you to write yourself a warmly compassionate letter, telling yourself exactly how you feel as you answer the following questions. Are you happy to be alive? Or would you prefer to be able to cease to live? If your truthful answer is the latter, then you have a negative attitude towards existence and are at war within yourself at a deep level. You know, consciously, that you have to continue your daily life, but at your deepest level, you would like to quit. The interior war prevents you from attracting all that you could be experiencing with a positive emotional pattern. How do you really feel about your relatives? Is there any buried hostility which you do not want to admit or that you did not realize existed? How do you feel about your employment, colleagues, entertainment, other races, etc.? Write down all your discoveries about yourself and lock it away in a safe place. This work you have done for yourself is for yourself, only for your benefit. You have not done it to make you a better person, or to please God, or to win approval from other people. You have done this work to remove existing inner blocks to your spiritual development and ultimate happiness. If you decide to change your life by reading these letters daily, I urge you to put your dated letter in a safe place. Reread it in a year's time and rejoice in the great changes which you will see have taken place in your mindset. You will also see that there have been changes in your circumstances. Remember that prayer and meditation focused entirely on your Creator will bring you new strength and insight, which, in turn, will bring changes to your feelings and environment. When praying, never focus on your problems. Always ask for the right remedy. Let the Creator bring you the right solutions, which your human mind is incapable of thinking up. For instance, never tell your creative Father how ill you are. Concentrate on the power you are receiving immediately into your condition, although your consciousness may be too densely human to feel it, and give thanks for your swift recovery and believe in it. When you give thanks, you are accepting, acknowledging, believing, impressing in your own consciousness the realization that your prayer now lies within the Father love consciousness and is being processed for visible manifestation in due course at the right time. When in Palestine, I constantly gave thanks for the work before it was accomplished. Never pray and then go out of your room and tell people how ill you feel, or how terrible the personal or national situation is. If you have asked the Father Creator to solve your problems, finances, or poor health, what an insult to the Father Creator to continue to bring up past negative conditions. You immediately undo the work the Father Creator has engaged in. If, in your mind, after prayer, the old conditions have not become past negative conditions, then return to prayer until you can dismiss them from your mind and really believe that all is being divinely taken care of right that minute. Return again and again to giving thanks for the benefits you have asked for. They will surely materialize. There are many thousands of people in your world today, consistently relying on the Universal Father Creator to fulfill their every need and witnessing to the manifold blessings in their lives. Abandon fears. They have availed you nothing. Now, turn to the Universal Father Creator as the source of your being. conception, growth, development, nutrition, regeneration, healing, fulfillment of your every need, protection, all within a system of spiritual law and order. Realize that all this wonderful work is constructive, purposeful, orderly. You truly have a mastermind behind you, your family and living conditions. Trust it. Do not allow your thinking to spoil the divine creative operation. Remember, above all, that I, the Christ, only performed my so-called miracles because I realized that the kingdom of God was within me and that I could always rely on my Creator Father to do the work in and through me. Remember that you only have an individual consciousness because you have drawn it from the Creative Father consciousness. When your personal consciousness is fully cleansed of negativity, you will discover that you, too, have become a purified channel of Creative Father consciousness. You will also be a joyous source of growth, nutrition, healing, nurturing, protection, fulfillment of need within a system of good organizational law and order to all who come within your orbit. This powerful influence will be extended through your mind to your families, friends, neighbors, farmlands, and your animals and crops. Even as electricity passed through your hands will light a Bunsen burner in a laboratory, so will your life force radiations benefit all who come within your radius of influence. This was the intention behind creation. You were intended to express universal creative consciousness through your mind and heart. I, the Christ, have come at this time to show you how to do this. First of all, consider my state of consciousness when I performed many so-called miracles. I did not pray a set prayer. I simply asked the Creative Father, radiating through my own consciousness, for whatever was needed. I strongly realized and visualized the Father creative consciousness was a dynamic operating force which manifested itself through the visible world as creativity, intelligent design, growth, nutrition and nourishment, protection, healing, regeneration, fulfillment of every need, all within a system of law and order. I realized that the Creative Father consciousness would radiate all its nature through my consciousness to enter the consciousness of those who had asked for healing and sincerely believed they would receive it. I also knew that if they did not have faith and expectancy of healing, this type of negative consciousness would not be influenced by the inflow of the nature of Father consciousness, and no healing would take place. I also realized that the healing work done by the Creative Father consciousness was really love made visible on earth. I also realized that all the work done by the Creative Father consciousness within the visible world was love made manifest and gave thanks. I realized that out of universal consciousness had come all the substance of the universe and gave thanks. I realized that Father creative consciousness was the worker and that it was eternal and infinite, and nothing except the human mind could stop it from doing its work. Therefore, I rid my mind of any human feelings and thoughts, and I knew that I was a perfect channel of Father love, and knew that the perfect will of Father love would be accomplished in the person who needed healing. But note this, I also knew that whatever in that person's consciousness had brought about this crippled or maimed or diseased condition had been erased in his body for the time being. The question was, would his normal consciousness bring about a return of the condition divinely erased from his body? Therefore, I said to the person who had received healing, "Go your way and sin no more." I want you to know and believe with all your hearts that my state of consciousness when on earth, described to you in the above paragraphs, is the state of consciousness to which you should also aspire with all your mind and heart. My experiences of enlightenment in the desert enabled me to achieve the Christ consciousness to a large extent whilst on earth. But you can follow in my steps if you have the will to do so, and I will surely be at hand to help you on your journey. You may feel my presence if you are sufficiently sensitive to do so, but if for some time you feel nothing, do not be cast down, because as you do the work of changing your consciousness, you can be absolutely certain you will be tuning into my Christ consciousness, and I will be aware of all that is happening to you. Know that your purpose on earth is to ascend in spiritual consciousness until you transcend all the humanhood which presently holds you back, until, eventually, you, too, can control the elements and become a master. Realize, too, that when world consciousness is fully attuned to Father creative consciousness, all things inimical to the perfect well-being of man will disappear. There will be no more malaria-bearing mosquitoes, locusts to strip your crops, severe climatic conditions, infections, viruses, and everything else which presently cause problems for living things. You will live within a cloak of universal protection. When your own consciousness is perfectly attuned to and in harmony with Father love, then you too will be divinely protected and will become channels of creative design, growth, nutrition and nourishment, protection, healing, regeneration, fulfillment of need, law, and order. Father love will be operational within your mind, heart, body, and your affairs. It will be operational in all those to whom you direct its power.